My husband Mark has what I call friendly face syndrome. Basically, it means strangers take one look at him and immediately decide they've known him their entire lives. It's not that he has a particularly generic or forgettable face, he's actually quite handsome, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that crinkles the corners, but rather that he radiates this kind of instant trust vibe. You know that feeling when you meet someone and within 30 seconds you're telling them things you haven't told your therapist? That's Mark's superpower. Cashiers at the grocery store tell him their entire life stories while scanning his purchases. Last week, an elderly woman at the deli counter spent 15 minutes explaining her late husband's battle with prostate cancer while Mark patiently waited for half a pound of turkey breast. Neighbors wave at him like they've been best friends for decades, when in reality we've only exchanged awkward hellos while wrestling with recycling bins. The mailman once invited him to a backyard barbecue after knowing him for approximately 4 minutes. And apparently, some women interpret that natural approachability as a personal, exclusive invitation wrapped in a bow and delivered directly to their doorstep. Which is exactly how we met Lily. Lily was dating one of Mark's friends, or at least that's what she claimed when she first started appearing at gatherings. The truth was more ambiguous. She had recently begun orbiting Ryan's friend group like a small, determined moon, and nobody was quite sure which planet she actually belonged to. She showed up to the barbecue attached to the arm of some guy named Derek, who seemed vaguely uncomfortable with the arrangement but too polite to question it. Within the first hour, she had detached herself from Derek and was working the crowd like a seasoned politician running for office. You know the type. People who enter a room and immediately assume they're the center of it. We first encountered Lily at a barbecue Ryan hosted in his backyard. It was one of those perfect Saturday afternoons in early summer where the heat makes beer taste crisper and people's inhibitions slide off like sweat. The grill was going, someone had brought a cornhole set, and a portable speaker was playing a playlist that none of us had curated but everyone tolerated. I was stationed by the grill, performing my self-appointed duty of ensuring the hamburgers didn't transform into charcoal briquettes, when Lily materialized beside me like she'd been summoned. She positioned herself strategically, angling her body so the afternoon sun caught her highlights just right, and without any preamble whatsoever she asked, "So, which one is your boyfriend?" I pointed toward Mark, who was at that moment locked in what appeared to be a philosophical death match with Ryan. The topic under debate, whether pineapple possesses any legitimate claim to existence on pizza. Mark was gesturing passionately with a metal skewer, his face alight with the fervor of someone defending a sacred principle. "That one," I said, pointing with the spatula. She studied him for a long moment, tilting her head like a bird evaluating a particularly interesting worm. Her eyes traveled the length of him, cataloging, calculating, assessing. "Oh," she finally said, her tone attempting casualness but landing somewhere in the vicinity of predatory. "He's cute." That should have been the first warning flare. But at that moment I simply nodded and returned my attention to the burgers. Yes, he was cute. That was hardly breaking news. I'd married him partly for that face after all. 10 minutes later I watched her navigate directly toward him through the clusters of chatting guests. From my seat at the patio table I had an unobstructed view of the entire performance. I observed how Lily positioned herself directly in Mark's line of sight, interrupting his pizza debate without the slightest acknowledgement that he'd been mid-sentence. "Hi," she said, executing a hair flip so practiced it could have been choreographed. "I'm Lily." Mark blinked, momentarily disoriented by the sudden appearance, but being fundamentally Mark, he responded with automatic politeness. "I'm Mark." Then she laughed. At absolutely nothing. Nobody had told a joke. Nobody had made a witty observation. She simply laughed, as if he'd delivered the punchline of the century. Mark blinked again, slower this time, like a computer processing unexpected input. Ryan materialized at my elbow, leaning in conspiratorially. "Brace yourself," he murmured. "She does that. It's her whole thing." At first I genuinely wasn't bothered. I've never been the jealous type, it seems exhausting, all that suspicion and insecurity. Besides which, Mark possesses the subtlety of a cinder block when it comes to detecting flirting. He's not playing hard to get, he's genuinely unaware that there's a game happening at all. Women could strip naked and perform interpretive dance about their desire for him, and he'd probably ask if they needed directions to the nearest hospital. This proved true immediately. Lily leaned against the counter beside him, deliberately closing the distance between them. "So," she said, her voice dropping to what she presumably considered a seductive register, "are you always this funny?" Mark looked at her with genuine bewilderment. "I was talking about pizza," he pointed out. "Yes," she said, leaning infinitesimally closer. "But you're funny. It's attractive." Mark processed this information slowly, like someone reading terms and conditions. "Thank you," he offered, the question mark audible. And then, without pausing to see if she had more to add, he walked away to refill his drink. First attempt, spectacularly failed. But Lily was nothing if not persistent. She belonged to that baffling category of people who interpret clear lack of interest as an invitation to try harder. Later, while the group had rearranged itself into a loose circle around the patio table, she moved her chair. Not incrementally, not subtly. She picked up her chair and deliberately placed it next to Mark's. Not next to her date Derek, who was now nursing a beer in silent resignation across the table. Next to my husband. "So what do you do for work?" she asked, adopting a pose that involved resting her chin on her hand and gazing up at him through her eyelashes. "I'm an architect," Mark replied, reaching for a handful of chips. Lily's eyes expanded to comical proportions, as if he'd just revealed he was an astronaut who also volunteered at puppy shelters. "Wow," she breathed. "That is so attractive. Like, genuinely. Architects have such beautiful minds." Mark looked over at me, his expression clearly communicating, "Are you seeing this?" "Apparently I'm attractive now," he announced. I smiled warmly. "Congratulations. I've been telling you that for years." Ryan choked on his beer. Most women at this juncture would have taken the hint. The married man was openly communicating with his wife about the situation. The wife was present and visibly unthreatened. The social cues were not subtle. Lily, however, appeared to have missed the day they taught social cues. Instead of retreating, she doubled down with the determination of someone who mistakes persistence for charm. At one point she deployed the classic maneuver, the casual arm touch. That supposedly innocent gesture that everyone knows is anything but. She laughed at something Mark said. "Honestly, I don't remember him saying anything remotely humorous. He was explaining cantilever engineering," and suddenly her fingers were wrapped around his forearm like she'd discovered a handrail. Mark froze instantly. His entire body went still like a rabbit sensing a predator. He looked down at the foreign hand on his skin with an expression of mild scientific curiosity. Then, with the careful precision of someone handling a hazardous material, he gently removed her fingers. "Careful," he said, his tone utterly devoid of flirtation. "My wife gets jealous." To eliminate any possible ambiguity, he pointed directly at me. I was seated perhaps 15 feet away, but I raised my hand in an enthusiastic wave. "I'm terrifying," I called out helpfully. Half the group laughed. Ryan's girlfriend actually snorted. Lily did not laugh. Over the following hour, the situation escalated in ways that would have been impressive if they weren't so pathetic. Lily cycled through what I can only assume was her entire repertoire of flirting techniques, and Mark deflected each one with the unconscious efficiency of a professional athlete. When she said, "You must work out," he replied, "Not really. I carry grocery bags. Sometimes I lift a cat." When she asked, "Do you cook?" he answered, "Only when my wife supervises. Left to my own devices, I've been known to create kitchen fires." When she complimented his eyes, he said, "Thanks. They're mostly for seeing." At one point, clearly growing desperate, she actually said, "You're the kind of guy women fight over." Mark's face registered genuine alarm. "Please don't fight," he said earnestly. "That sounds exhausting. And expensive. Medical bills are no joke." I watched this exchange from across the table, genuinely entertained. The man was batting away come-ons like they were slow-pitch softballs, and he didn't even realize he was playing. The weirdest part of the evening, however, wasn't Lily's increasingly unhinged behavior. It was the response from some of the men in the group. A couple of Mark's less observant friends, instead of recognizing the situation for the cringe fest it was, started actively encouraging her. "Go on, Lily," one of them called out, grinning. "Steal him away. Show us what you've got." Ryan immediately shook his head, his expression darkening. "Don't start that," he warned. But a couple of the guys laughed, clearly enjoying the spectacle, oblivious to how uncomfortable they were making everyone else. Lily preened under the attention, interpreting their encouragement as validation. Her smile widened, her posture straightened, and she launched into what she clearly believed was her final form. She repositioned herself so she was sitting close enough to Mark that their knees were nearly touching. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to what she probably imagined was a seductive purr, "if things ever don't work out with you and your wife, you should call me. I'm serious. I'd treat you right." The silence that descended was so complete you could hear the ice melting in abandoned drinks. Mark stared at her for a long moment. Then, with the calm certainty of someone who has never doubted anything in his life, he pointed at me again. "We're married," he said. "Legally. There was a ceremony and everything." "I know," Lily said, waving her hand dismissively. "But you never know what might happen. People change. Feelings change." Mark leaned back in his chair, creating physical distance between them. "No," he said quietly. "They don't. Not this one." Ryan slapped the table, howling with laughter. "He shut that down like a bouncer at an exclusive club," he wheezed. I still hadn't said anything directly to Lily. Honestly, most of this had been genuinely funny to observe. Mark was clearly uninterested, and Lily was making herself look increasingly ridiculous with each passing minute. But then she made a tactical error. She turned to me. "You're really calm about all this," she observed, her tone attempting casual admiration, but landing somewhere in the vicinity of condescension. "I try to be," I said pleasantly. "If I were in your position, I'd be worried." She smiled, confident now that she had shifted the dynamic. "You know? Competition." Ah. There it was. The temperature around the table dropped approximately 10 degrees. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but I caught his eye and gave a tiny shake of my head. This one I wanted to handle myself. "Competition," I repeated, savoring the word. Lily crossed her arms, clearly expecting me to fluster, to protest, to reveal insecurity. Instead, I set down my drink and leaned forward slightly. "Lily," I said, my voice soft and utterly calm, "do you want to know why I'm not worried?" Her smile flickered, but she held her ground. "Sure. Enlighten me." "Because the only person in this entire backyard who thinks this is a competition is you." A few people choked back laughs. Ryan's girlfriend covered her mouth with her hand. I continued, still pleasant, still unhurried. "You've spent the last 2 hours trying to flirt with a married man who has, repeatedly and without ambiguity, redirected your attention to his wife. You've complimented him, touched him, sat far too close to him, and explicitly suggested he contact you if his marriage ends. And in response, he has talked about grocery shopping, mentioned his cat, pointed at me approximately 17 times, and expressed concern about the financial implications of women fighting over him." Mark nodded solemnly. "Medical debt is no joke," he confirmed. "Yet somehow," I went on, "you've constructed an entire narrative in which I should feel threatened by your presence. Do you know what that kind of thinking is called?" Lily's face had progressed from pink to red. "What?" she demanded. "I don't know the clinical term," I admitted. "But colloquially? It's called main character syndrome. And it must be exhausting, going through life believing everyone else is just an extra in your personal movie." The silence that followed was the most satisfying silence I've ever experienced. One of the guys who'd been encouraging Lily earlier attempted to intervene. "Hey, come on, it's all just jokes." I turned to him, still smiling. "Is it? Then you won't mind if I mention this whole evening to your girlfriend. I'm sure she'll find it hilarious." He suddenly became extremely interested in his beer. Ryan was openly weeping with laughter now. Lily stood up so abruptly her chair scraped against the patio stones. "I wasn't flirting," she said, her voice high and defensive. "Everyone's blowing this way out of proportion." Mark blinked at her. "You told me to call you if my marriage ends," he reminded her. That seemed pretty flirty. Someone coughed loudly. It might have been the word bullshit. "It's hard to say." Lily grabbed her bag from where it hung on her chair. "This is ridiculous. I'm leaving." Ryan shrugged, still grinning. "You did kind of start it." She shot him a look that could have curdled milk and stalked toward the gate without another word. She didn't say goodbye to Derek, who watched her go with an expression of profound relief, like a hostage who'd just watched the ransom demand get denied. The moment the gate clicked shut behind her, the tension shattered like glass. People started talking again, laughter bubbled up from multiple directions, and someone turned up the music. Ryan's girlfriend came over and high-fived me. Ryan looked at Mark, then at me, shaking his head slowly. Your wife is genuinely terrifying, he said, but his tone was pure admiration. Mark nodded proudly. I told everyone. Nobody ever listens. On the drive home, the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mark drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console where I could reach it if I wanted. Which I did. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, he glanced over at me. Were you actually bothered by any of that? He asked. I considered the question honestly. Not really. It was mostly just sad, you know? All that effort, all that performance for absolutely nothing. Good. He paused. Because for what it's worth, you're still my favorite person at every party. Actually, you're my favorite person everywhere. Parties, funerals, grocery stores, traffic jams. All of it. I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. That's worth quite a lot, actually. We drove in silence for another minute. You know what I don't understand? Mark said eventually. What? Why women do that. Like I'm married. I'm very clearly married. There's a ring and everything. Why would anyone want to be with someone who's willing to cheat? If a man approached you like that, I'd assume he was garbage. I considered this. Some people, I said slowly, don't see it that way. For them, it's about winning. About proving they're more desirable than the current partner. It's not really about you at all. It's about them and their need for validation. Mark shook his head. That sounds miserable. It probably is. Another pause. Also, he added, you're way out of my league. Everyone can see that. So really, she was wasting her time from the beginning. I laughed out loud. I love that you genuinely believe that. I have eyes, he said simply. I know what I look like. I know what you look like. Basic math. And honestly, that's why Lily never stood a chance. Not because she wasn't attractive enough or charming enough or persistent enough. Not because Mark is incapable of temptation, he's human after all. But because when someone looks at you across a crowded backyard, after 2 hours of being openly pursued by another woman, and tells you with absolute certainty that you're out of their league, when someone chooses you so clearly and so effortlessly that they don't even realize they're making a choice, there's no competition against that. There's not even a game to play. Some people spend their whole lives chasing validation from people who will never truly see them. And some people just go home with their favorite person, hold hands in the car, and watch the sunset together. I know which one I'd rather be.